In this episode, I install the Ranger Parallel Kit. There it is, giving me extended range. I'm Jimmy Chang, and welcome back to the channel. Let's start from the beginning. You're going to want to go to the Landsurf website. You can Google it, Landsurf Onewheel. They're the makers of the Fangs and the Bone Handle. Those are both products that I enjoy, and I have a review on the Fangs, and I will be making a review on the Bone Handle. When you look for the Ranger kit, there's two different kits. Don't get the XLR kit. You'll want the Parallel kit, at least for this video. The Parallel kit requires a little bit more elbow grease, but I think it's totally worth it. You'll install the Ranger mount onto your hard fender with the cable coming out to the left of the Onewheel. I show how to install the Ranger mount on my previous video, which you can check out in the description below. Then you'll follow the instructions that come with the kit. The instructions are great, but I'm just going to walk through the process here. You're going to remove everything from the bottom of your board. You can see that I've already removed the Bodie Harrison hot pink float plates, which you see on the side. Once you've removed the screws that they tell you to remove, there will also be two plastic brackets inside the rail, keeping the cable inside the frame. You'll remove those. And then there'll be another little metal plate underneath the axle, and you remove that right there. That's what I'm taking out there. Make sure to put all your screws in a fashion that you'll remember how to put everything back together when you're done. Then you'll remove the widest connector. You'll detach that and then gently pull that cable out. That widest connector and the cable connects to the battery box. Now I'm removing the rear foot plate and the rear bumper. Then I'll remove these screws holding the battery box in, also holding the bumper that I'm removing here. Shred hard. Thank you, Future Motion, for reminding us to do so. And then I'm going to be sliding out the battery box. I do a little vacuuming because there is a lot of sand kind of wedged into the nooks and crannies that made the battery box hard to remove, but eventually I was able to get it out. At this point, I shake off some of the sand, and I do a little cleaning on the battery box using a screwdriver to get the caked on dirt, sand, and debris that's stuck on the battery box. At this point, I go on to the monotonous task of removing all the screws, and there were a lot of screws. So as I go through removing all these screws, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about why you would want to install this Parallel Ranger kit rather than an XLR port Ranger kit. Well, the XLR port, while it is very easy, it does not work on the newest version of the Onewheel Plus. Future Motion has come out with a hardware update on their new Onewheel Pluses, and the XLR modification, if you will not work on those Onewheels. Check the description down below for more, but basically this modification will work for all Onewheel Pluses and all V1s. So here I am opening my battery box, and there is the battery. Now that we have it open, I'm going to get my Ranger wire harness. This is the wire harness here. Make sure the yellow end is covered by the supplied silicone cap. That's to help keep it protected. Then I expose the wiring underneath and unplug this EC3 connector. The EC3 connector, one end goes to the battery, the other end goes to the BMS. I splice in the wire harness there, and there you have it. That's all you got to do. Now that is the easy part. The tough part is to get all the wiring where it needs to go, and let's talk about doing that. So you're going to have to remove the battery, at least partially. Then you're going to need a drill with a drill bit, a 3/16 inch drill bit. You're going to drill a hole into the battery tray. Then you're going to use either a Dremel, or in my case I use a little saw, and I'm going to cut away the edges so that I make a slot where the battery cable can run through. And so there I am, sawing out that piece, and there is the U-shaped slot that I have made. This is where the cable will exit out of the battery box. So I slide it in there. It's a tight fit, and that's what you want. Then I go through the process of tucking everything nicely into the battery tray. This took a little bit of effort, but there you have it. I think next time, if I would have done it again, I would have tucked the battery cable a little bit deeper. You're going to get some silicone, and I use silicone both on the inside and the outside to add a little water protection. I had a tough time getting the silicone where it needed to be, so I used one of the hex wrenches to spread the silicone around the cable as it exited the battery box. Once I was satisfied with the silicone job around the exit hole for the cable, I put my attention to tucking the cables nicely near the BMS. Here's a little tip. I took the excess cable, I did a little coil method there, a little loop-de-loop, and I tucked it in. Be sure not to put too much force on the BMS because some of those things look fragile there. I took the aluminum cover and put it back on. You've got this foamy padding on the inside, and that is a little bit of extra give, so don't worry if things don't fit perfectly. But one thing you do need to worry about is making sure that no cables get pinched, and you can see there one of the cables got pinched and a little tear ensued, so I took some duct tape to fix that up. I tape it away from the edge, and then one tip is to start with that edge when putting on the cover to avoid the guillotine effect, which caused that little tear in the cable. As I reinstall all the screws that were removed when I took off the battery box cover, I make sure not to make it a completely tight seal, and I'll show you here. I leave a little gap, and that's so I can add a little bit of silicone in there just to add to the water protection, just in case I permanently disrupted any of that foam. I want to make sure this is as waterproof as I can get it. Once I've put some silicone on all four sides, I then completely tighten the screws for hopefully a more watertight seal. This kit requires basically two steps. The first step was to install the mount onto your fender, and that I showed in a previous video. And then the second step, which I've shown here, was to remove the stock battery from the Onewheel, install the included cable, and then put everything back together. So there are all my screws. I've laid them out in a way that I will remember the order in which I put them back, and I recommend you come up with your own system to do so. I do a little bit of cleaning. I slide the battery box back in and putting everything back together as it was. Then the moment of truth, I pushed the power button to see if it would power on, and voila, the blue glow of the power button. I was satisfied that I had done everything correctly, so I went ahead and I put everything back together again. Of course, I had to put on the hot pink Float Life Bodie Harrison plates. Then coming up here, I do my own little modification. I use a little twisty tie, bread twisty tie, so that the cable coming out of the battery box would be a little more accessible for me, and so that the cable will not rub up against the tire. When not in use, remember to put that red silicone cap over that wire because you have a current running through there potentially. We are free and clear. There's no chance of rubbing against the tire. So now that everything is installed, let's talk about how to get everything hooked up. So you're going to take off that protective cover from your Ranger mount. You can leave that on your charger so that you don't lose it. Then the first thing you always do before you plug any leads together, the first thing you do is you put on the Ego battery. Only after the Ego battery is installed do you plug the two yellow connectors together, the XT60 connectors. You do it in this order to reduce the chance of shock. When the XT60 connector is hooked up, the terminals of the Ranger mount are live, and so you shouldn't touch those metal terminals on your Ranger mount if they are exposed. And that's it. Put on your safety gear. Here I'm putting on my Flatland 3D gloves and my helmet, and I'm off to the races, enjoying my extended range. So the whole install took me about 2 hours, and that was fiddling around with cameras and making sure I had the right angle so that you guys on YouTube could follow along. I'm sure if you did it without messing around with cameras, you'd be able to do it within the hour or so that is recommended by Landsurf. Remember that this is something that can be done on your Onewheel V1 and your Onewheel Plus, no matter what hardware you have. Landsurf has put out a nice and solid design for this Ego battery parallel modification. The big green battery hanging off the fender does draw attention, but it is actually kind of nice to tuck your foot under there, and some can use it as a flight fin. All in all, I'm very pleased with having the extended range. But you don't have to take my word for it. For another perspective, check out John Dyer's channel and his review. He does a great job. Here's a link for it. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.